Hey everybody, welcome back to another video tutorial, and for this video tutorial we are looking at the topic of database management system, which is abbreviated DBMS. Now, a database management system refers to a set of tools that are used to organize, store, modify, as well as to retrieve data from a computer system. Now, a database management system is an upgrade to our manual filing system, and what it does is to save a lot of time. It is very efficient. It reduces or eliminates data redundancy, which means that whatever we usually have duplicating, whether it is files, folders, etc., in our manual setting, then the database management system has validation checks, which provides us with the ability to pick up whenever we have information being repeated and then allow us to make the necessary adjustments there. Now, the software that we're using for this tutorial is the Microsoft Access. So I will now proceed to opening that software. So I check my search and I type in Access because I have it installed on my system, and this is our current default page that we will be provided with once we open the Access app. Now, there are a variety of templates that we can use for the purpose of creating our database. However, we will be using the one that says database, blank database. Now, another pop-up box appears, and for this, we are given the option to change our file name as well as to identify a location on our computer system where we would want to save this new database. So I'm going to rename my database and call it customer database. And then from there, I'm going to select the option that says create. Now this will take us to a blank area that has a default table 1 open. But for our purpose, we will go ahead and close this. So I right click and select close. We have our main area in our database, which provides us with where our working area rather. So the different objects that we'll be creating, this is the area in which we will be able to see the results as well as the background work being taking place. So the far left, we are able to see the different objects that we will be creating, which includes tables, queries, reports, forms, as well as macro. But for our purpose, we will not be using the macro object. Now we have very few tabs within our database, and we have the home, create, external data, as well as database tools. Our create tab is where we will be performing a lot of things such as the creation of our tables, queries, forms, as well as reports. External data section is able to allow us to include whether it is a spreadsheet document. So let's say we have a majority of the fields that we want in our database in an already created spreadsheet. So we could use the external data option to insert our spreadsheet fields within our current database. We will also look at that further down in our tutorial. Our database tools section has a variety of things. However, the main thing that we will be using in this area is the relationships, and this will just give us connection between or among tables created. So we will now return to the create tab. And the first thing that we will be including in the creation is our table. Now, using knowledge from spreadsheet, a table is made up of our rows and columns, and these also contain information such as records, and records are those represented by rows, and this include information for different entities or different persons within our table. We will also look at these as we move through our tutorials. Now, there are two types of tables that we can create. We have a regular table as well as a table design. Now, a table, so I'm going to select the option that says table, and what this does is to open our table in a view where everyone who is able to access our database will be able to see our information. So this is where the data will be entered or displayed based on the type of information that we will be entering into our database. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And then the second table that we can create is the one that says table design. And what this does is to create our table based on a programmer's aspect, right? So this is what a programmer is able to see, or a database creator is able to see in terms of the different fields that they want the users to see when they're finished creating the database, as well as a data type that will be accepted from the users. All right, so the first one, and then this also is the one that we will be using for this tutorial purpose. So I will remain here. So the first thing that I want to do is to identify the different fields that I want for a particular table, and then the matching data type. Now let's say table 1 is a table that will be used to collect information, personal information for different customers. So some of the fields that we can find as it relates to personal information, maybe a customer ID, their first and last name, their address, telephone number, maybe their gender, and so forth. So we're just going to put in a few of these for now, and then if it is required, we will be inserting additional information as we go along. So customer ID, first name, last name for now, and then we'll see what else we would like to include. And then customer ID, we will be using a number as the data type. First name, we can change this to short text, and automatically current system that we're using. We also have a last name, and that's short text. We can have gender, and this also will be short text. Maybe we could have date of birth. Date of birth, the data type that will be used for this is a date /time. Also, we could indicate that customer, whether it's a new customer or not, so we can say new customer, and then we can have a checkbox to indicate when we tick it, it would mean that they are a new customer, and if it is not, then it would mean that they are not a new customer. So the data type that we use for this is a yes, no. So we will work with these fields for now, and then the next thing that we want to do is to rename this default table 1 and allow this table to now appear as customer personal data. So I'm going to right click on the heading that says table 1 and then select the option that says save. Once that is completed, another pop-up box appears and it has a default name. So I will remove that and then put in the name that I want for the table. Once completed, we can go ahead and select OK. And as you can see, OK, so it asks us to include a primary key. Do you want to create a primary key? No. I'm going to select the option that says no. Why? Because if I had selected yes, then the computer would automatically give me a default primary key, and currently the primary key that I want is the customer ID. So I select that, and then to my left it says primary key, so again I select that. What is a primary key? Now, a primary key is a unique field that is used to identify different tables within our spreadsheet, right? So currently I have created a customer personal data table. And for this table, they're asking us which field that is currently here will we use to identify this table. The customer ID was selected, reason being every customer we know, whenever they go to a different business, each customer will be provided with a unique ID number, right? This means that each customer will get a different ID number. We could not have used first name or last name as the primary key because we can have customers, multiple customers with the same first name as well as last name. Same for the gender, date of birth, or whether or not they're a new customer. So the key that would be most feasible for identifying this table would be the customer ID, because this will not be repeated as each customer will be provided with a new ID number. So the next thing that we want to do now is to fill out the information for this table. And how do we go about doing that? Well, currently we are in the location that says Table Tools, and the selected field is the design. To the far left, we have an option called View. Now, what the view does is to allow us to switch between the programmer view as well as the end user view. So currently we're in the programmer or the database designer view, and then we now want to proceed to a regular person view, right? So we go ahead and we click on the view option, and the one that allows us to enter the information for these fields is the data sheet view. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and then it will prompt us to save the table if we did not do so in the last changes that we made. So I'm going to select yes for that. Now the next thing, as you can see, we are now able to see the different field names and then the location where we can be able to enter the information for the different fields. Now for customer ID, we will start at 100, or we could say 1001, etc. It is up to the user or based on the instructions that were provided. So for mine it is 100, and then I can go ahead and enter the first person's information. So Pam Stills, and her gender is female, but for our purpose we will enter F or M for the gender. And date of birth, as you can see, when I click in that area they provide me with a calendar, and I could easily click the calendar and then make the adjustment regarding the date. Alright, so let's say Pam was born February 18, and I can also change the date here, 1986. And then is Pam a new customer? We can go ahead and select the option that says yes. So this currently we have one record in our database, and as we said, a record is represented by a row which moves from left to right, and the current record that we have is for a customer called Pam Stills. So I'm just going to go ahead and proceed by entering information for 4 additional customers. So we're gonna leave Jake unticked because he is a returning customer. Alright, so I'm gonna tick for Jake. So that's 3. We have 2 more customers to go. Alright, and then final customer. Wonder player. So we just put in 5 random names, and then this would be the information that we have in our customer personal data table. So as you can see, this is the view that our customers or whoever it is that will be using the database, this is the view that they will be able to see. If it is that you are the one who is making the changes to the database, then your main view would have been the design view, and this we select by choosing the view tab and switch to design view. And then in here we could add in additional field names and matching data type. Now let's say because gender, we identify that we're just using letter for gender, we could go ahead and click on gender, and then we could change the field size from 255 to 1. So this means that this gender field name will be only able to accept one character for the entry in the regular table. Now if I return to the design datasheet view, select save again. All right, save. And if I return and I try to type an E in this, then I would get an error because I changed the field size from 255 to 1. So the gender area is only able to accept one input for the requirement of the table is completed. So I can this. So I right click and select close, and then it was saved, so automatically it closed. Now let's say we have a second table that we want to create, and then this table now is based on the different items that were purchased. So I can go ahead and select create, and again I select the table design. Now this table we will be calling it items table or something of that nature. So items table. Now before we proceed, we would like firstly a primary key which will represent or identify this table specifically, as well as we would need a second key which is a foreign key. Now a foreign key is when another table has it as a primary key, and then it is now appearing in a second table as a foreign key. So it is the main key in one table, but it becomes an additional key that connects to a second table. Now in this case, the foreign key would become the foreign key for the items table would become the customer ID, because this key can be used to collect information from the customer personal data table without having to have their first name, last name, etc. Now the primary key that we're going to use for this table is called item ID, and then the foreign key. So I can also apply the primary key, and then that is there. So now we are including the foreign key. Let me go ahead and open this table. So in the customer personal data table, our primary key was the customer ID, right? So they're saying when I move to a next table, how is it that I can make a connection with other tables without having to have every single field that was in that table being brought back to this new table? And this is where we would use a primary key, because this was the key that we use as a unique identifier for this specific table. Now I can go ahead and identify exactly how we place this. So I can go to the view, design view, and it was customer ID, and then the data type was number. Also make sure that when you move the or making a connection of the key in another table, that the data type matches back with the same one from the previous table. So I'm gonna borrow this, which is customer ID. Data type, it's gonna be matching back with this as well, which is number. So again, all right, so that's the only thing that we're collecting from this table, so we can go ahead and close this for now. The next thing that we want in our item table is of course the items purchased, and we could also include the quantity as well as the unit price and then the final price. All right, but for these now, these would become numeric data. quantity, of course, this is going to be changed to how many items were purchased, 1, 2, 3, etc. Unit price now would be the single price for the item. So if we bought 10 items, we want to find the price for one of that item, and then this will represent the unit price. So again, this would also be a number, and then the final thing would be the final price. How do we arrive at the final price? The final price would be the product of the amount that was purchased as well as the price for one of the item, and then this of course would be the multiplication of the quantity and the unit price. Now we would have to use a data type which we refer to as calculated. And what the calculated data type does is to do the mathematical calculations similar to what we did in spreadsheet, in order to find the overall price of the items that were purchased. All right, currently for table 1, we are not seeing any of the field names that we had included because the table was not saved. So I am going to go ahead and just click on the X and then right click on the heading and save. Now we're going to rename this to items table and then select OK. All right, so it says it cannot be saved because calculated is empty per se then. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is to delete this final price for now. So I click on that, and then at the top here where it says delete rows, I click on that. Next thing I'm going to do is save this. All right, last thing that I want to include is the final price. This data type will be calculated because we are working on the final price, which is quantity times unit price. So calculated, and then our pop-up box appears. As you can see, the field names that we created earlier are now showing because our table have been saved. If the table was not saved prior to this, then we would not be able to see the different field names there. So please ensure that you save your table before you try to use the calculated field. Now the two fields that I want to add to this equation is a quantity. So I will double click on this and then followed by the multiplication sign. So I click here, multiplication, and then it's asking us what will the quantity be multiplied by, and in this case it is the unit price. So once that is completed, we can go ahead and select OK. From here, we can return to the regular user's view, which is a data sheet view. So to our left, we see view, click on the arrow, and we click on data sheet view. We did not save recent changes, so we can go ahead and select yes, and then our table has been opened. As you can see though, we currently don't have an item ID or any information regarding these, so we will go ahead and fill these out. But we currently have the different customer IDs, so what I'm going to do is to open the customer personal data and then copy the ID just for faster movements. So I open that and I click on the heading that says customer ID, then I right click and select copy, or I could just click on the heading and from the clipboard area I select copy. Once that is completed, I can close this table and then return to my items table. I am now locating the heading that matches back with customer ID, so I click on that and then in the clipboard area I select paste. They're saying you must enter value in the items table ID, so okay, we select okay, and then another pop-up box just to tell us that we're gonna paste some records, so we select yes. And then they're saying pasting errors, okay. All right, so there were some errors because our primary key area is currently empty, so what we would want to do is to ensure that our primary key area is filled out before we can do any pasting from the customer ID information. So for item ID, we could have a code, and it was say it is the sales department, so it's SA, and we probably can give it a number 101, SA 102, SA 103, SA 104, and SA 105. So this is 245 IDs. So I can now go ahead and collect the customer IDs from the personal data table. So again, I click on the heading customer ID, copy, and then I close that table and return to items table, and I'm looking for the heading that says customer ID. I click on that, and then I can go ahead and, as you can see, this time they did paste without error because the primary key area was filled out. Also, please remember that your primary key, there should be no repetition. So if you have SA101 two times, then when you are ready to create a relationship, there will be some errors that will gonna be, that will require you to return to the table in order to make the changes. All right, so we have item ID and customer ID filled out, so we can go ahead and complete the rest of field information. So items purchased, so let's say cake, frosting, ice cream, cups, and maybe plates. All right, so the quantity, it's up to the user what number you want to use. So let's say we ordered 3 cakes, frosting 4, ice cream 5, cups 24, plates 24. All right, so the unit price for 1 cake, let's say $1,500, frosting maybe 500 for one. Ice cream, we could probably say $200 for one. The cups for one, maybe $50, and then plates, we could change that to 45 or maybe 55. All right, and as you can see, automatically the final price was entered because that was a calculated field. And while we already placed the formula there, as soon as we have the required information in the quantity and unit, then automatically the final price would have been calculated by itself. So that's also another pretty cool thing that the calculated field does. So currently we have 2 tables, and we will leave the 2 tables there for now as our created tables. So I will go ahead and select close. Again, we select save just to make sure that we have everything there. All right, the next thing that I want to do is to have a relationship between these 2 tables. How and what is the purpose of the relationship? Again, we use a relationship whenever we want to make a connection between 2 or more tables, and then we use the primary key or the matching keys in 1 or 2 tables, and this would be able to bring up or pull up information from multiple tables without having to have all fields being used in a case like this. So we go to database tools and we locate relationships, and we're going to be adding both tables. So we add customer data table, personal data, and items table. Once we add all our required tables, then we can close this show table box. The next thing that we want to do is identify what keys do we have familiar in both tables. Do we have an item ID in both tables? No. Do we have a customer ID in both tables? Yes, I am able to see that, and both of them are unique. So what I'm gonna do is to drag the ID from one table to match the other in the second table. So I click on customer ID in this table and I drag it to the second table, and then once I place the cursor exactly on it, then I release. This provides us with the relationship box, which enables us to further make some adjustments. right? So as you can see, saying customer ID match with another customer ID in the items table, and this in fact was the same data type also. So next thing that I want to do is to enforce referential ID integrity as well as the Cascade update. What the purpose of these indicates that whenever we make a change in the database, instead of having to manually change it in more than one table, we can allow the system to make the changes. So let's say we change the price of the final price in one table, then we don't manually have to go to a second table to change the additional information, as it is updated once these are checked. Also, the relationship is a one-to-many, meaning that customer ID, there is one customer ID associated or can be associated with many items. All right, so we can go ahead and select create, and as you can see, the relationship has been created as there is a line that is linking the customer ID in one table with the customer ID in another table. So the primary key, customer ID, is the primary key in the personal data table, and when we move to the items table, it becomes a foreign key because it is no longer a primary key in the second table, but it is also there, which would indicate that it is now a foreigner then in that second table. All right, so the relationship is now created, so we can go ahead and select close. Again, we're going to save this, so we select yes. All right, so we thank you so very much for watching this first video tutorial on database management system, and in our next video tutorial we will be proceeding towards creating queries, forms, reports. All right, thank you so very much for watching, and please stay tuned.